review. Just a little review of what I said yesterday morning. A few little key pieces in the puzzle, and looking at the texts might help make matters a little more clear. I'm going to go first to Leviticus chapter 25, verse 1. And with this text, this is where the Lord tells Moses on Mount Sinai, when you enter the land I'm going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. The land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. And then he says in verse 3, for 6 years sow your fields, for 6 years prune your vineyards, and gather your crops. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a Sabbath of rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. It's the Lord demanding the land shall rest. Now, the first question that rose when I read this years ago, knowing a little bit about the seventh day and its synchrony with creation's week. Remember the calendar? Our weekly cycle is synchronous with creation's week. That means our seventh day today is synchronous with creation's Sabbath. Creation's seventh day. Our first day of the week is synchronous with creation's first day of the week. So the word synchrony means alignment. Now the question rose, what is this seventh year synchronized with? Well, that's a good question. And the way I answered it to myself is I said, well, I know that Jesus in Daniel 9 is crucified in a Wednesday year because the prophecy says so. He is crucified in the middle of a 7. And if you look at the calendar, what is the middle day of the week? A Wednesday. So Jesus would die in the middle of a Wednesday, in the middle of the week, in a Wednesday year. You understand? So I said, we have some synchrony. Because I know where Wednesday is, I can find out where Sabbath is. You understand?
The Sabbath year.
The Sabbath year. Because I know where the Wednesday year is, I can find out where the Sabbath year is. And that's the beauty of calendation. Once you get something fixed, you can work forward or you can work backward. You can calculate paydays forward or you can calculate paydays backward once you know where a payday is and its interval. So if you're paid every other Friday, you can calculate your paydays all the way back for 40 years if you want to. Or you can calculate your paydays forward 40 years if you want to, because synchrony allows that. So that was the first step, step 1. After discovering where the middle of the week that Jesus dies in the Wednesday year, I counted forward Thursday, Friday, Sabbath. So I know where God establishes a Sabbath year. It's not, I'm worried about where God establishes the Sabbath year and not man. God established the Wednesday year by dying in it. Does that make sense to you? So once you know a Sabbath year, guess what? You can start counting backwards. 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. And you can calculate all the Sabbath years you want. I calculated thousands of them. And I began to discover some very interesting things. That by having Jesus die in a Wednesday year, that puts the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem in a Sunday year. 457 BC. All of a sudden, the lights begin to come on. Wow. Look at this. There's perfect synchrony in those 70 weeks. Now, remember, this is kind of a neat point too. This may not hit you like it hit me, but it really, boom, when I read this. Look at this text. God told Daniel, through the angel, Gabriel, 70 weeks or 77s are decreed for your people. Well, because I know about the weekly cycle that God established at creation, I know that when God says 70 weeks, He's not talking about just any ordinary 7 days. Americans use the calendar. We may say that from here, Thursday the 6th, through Wednesday the 12th is a week, but God would never say that. That is not a week. That would be 7 days. To God, a week is here and His 7th day is there. But we use speech to convey ideas, and sometimes we use the terms, well, I'm going to be gone a month, and I'm leaving on the 12th, and I'll be back the 12th, you know. But God wouldn't do it that way. I'll be gone 30 days. When God speaks of time, He chooses how He enumerates that time very specifically. And this is why in the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, He uses in some instances days, like the 2300 evenings and mornings. And sometimes He'll use 70 weeks, because the synchrony. In Revelation 13:5, He says 42 months because of the synchrony of these time periods. And then He uses years in Revelation 20 to describe the 1,000 years. There's a synchrony to every unit of time that God has made. And once you understand where it starts and where it stops, whoa, the prophetic picture takes on a whole new dimension. Really quite marvelous. Let me go a little further now. When I read this in this text, that 70 weeks are decreed upon your people, the thing that blew me away, first, there's a synchrony that's being stated here. And number two, this presumes the presence of weeks. Presumes the presence of the operation of weeks. In other words, weeks are already going on. Weeks of years are already underway before we even get to Babylon. That's what I'm trying to say. And I went back then to Leviticus 25, the text I just showed you from Mount Sinai, and sure enough, that's where God set it all in motion. When you enter the land that I'm going to give you, the land is to have a Sabbath to the Lord. So God has established at the time of the Exodus this clock, this week of years. Everyone clear on that? Then, go back to Leviticus 25. We'll jump down to verse 8. God also set up the cycle of 49s, 7 sevens, at the time of the Exodus. He says, count off 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 times 7 years. 7 Sabbaths. Let me show you what 7 Sabbaths look like. Let's go to the overhead here. I'm going to zoom in so that this is a little bigger for you to look at. Okay, I hope you can see this on the screen. It's a little hot. The lighting here makes it kind of difficult. Do you see the first 7 years? And do you see the Sabbath year right here? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. 7 years. So that's one Sabbath. Do you see that little color box around that Sabbath there? Then look at the next Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sabbath. We're going to count off 7 Sabbaths of years, Sabbath years. And how many years are we going to have when we get to the bottom of the count? Is it just mere coincidence to you that God said 7 Sabbaths of years? Is it just a coincidence that we have a week of weeks? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sabbath. Let me zoom out just a little bit. Notice, if we call this first week the Sunday week, and the second week the Monday week, and the third week the Tuesday week, the fourth week the Wednesday week, the next thing you know is that we have a week of weeks. The reason, what drew me to that idea was the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost. In Leviticus 23, when God set up the observance of the Feast of Weeks, the wave sheaf always occurred on Sunday, the day after the Sabbath. And then He says, count off 7 full weeks, so that you present and have the feast on the day after the 7th Sabbath. Wow. Feast of Weeks, you've got a week of weeks, 7 weeks. God is always working in a matrix of 7 sevens. 7 is God's signature. Have you ever had a prescription from the doctor and you look at his handwriting where he signs it? Can you read it? No. But when God put His signature on His handiwork, He just wrote 7. 7 colors in the rainbow, 7 continents, 7 notes in the musical scale, 7 sayings of Jesus on the cross, 7 trumpets, 7 seals, 7 bowls. Could go on and on. The handiwork of God has the signature 7. And the funny thing is, it's an odd number. It fits into nothing. Nothing in nature, nothing in the planetary motion of the planets give us this strange number 7. It's God's signature. I think it's so cool. All right. Now that you know about the Jubilee cycle, and see what I don't know if you can see the chart from the back of the room, but just basically what I've done is that here is a week, and each day has 7 years, so that we have a week of Sabbaths, 49 years. And going across this chart, every vertical line is one Jubilee cycle. And so the Great Week turns out to be 70 Jubilee cycles. 10 cycles per day. 490 years per day. Now, let me share this with you. Why did God just pick out 70 weeks when He said to Daniel, 70 weeks are determined upon your people, which is 490 years. 70 times 7 is 490. Why didn't God say, well, 500 years are determined upon your people? Why didn't He just round it off? Well, why didn't He say 450? Why the 70? Is there something significant in the 70? Well, I think there is, because I discovered, as I presented yesterday, that the reason, when God finally lost His patience, now listen closely, God lost His patience finally with Israel and put them in captivity when they had violated how many Sabbaths? 70. And how many years did they spend in Babylon? 70. I want to show you that. I know I showed you this yesterday, but this is a little deep and you need to look at it twice. Let's go to the next chapter, Leviticus 26, and I'll start at verse 32. God is telling Israel, look, if you don't obey me, if you don't do the things I ask you to do, if you reject me, I want you to know up front what I'm going to do to you. God is very much up front. He doesn't slip one in on you. He tells you what He's going to do before He does it, and then He does it. That's what prophecy is all about. He's telling us what He's going to do, and whether we like it or not, believe it or not, reject it or not, makes no difference. He's going to do what He's going to do. Truth is there, waiting to be discovered. And whether it is believed or denied has no bearing on truth. I like that. God said to Israel, I will, if you disobey my commands and violate my statutes, I will lay waste the land so that your enemies who live there will be appalled. I will scatter you among the nations and will draw out my sword and pursue you. Your land will be laid waste and your cities will lie in ruins. Your cities will lie in ruins. Then the land will enjoy its Sabbath years. The land is going to get its rest with or without you. That's what God is saying. All the time that it lies desolate and you are in the country of your enemies, then the land will rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. All the time that it lies desolate, the land will have the rest it did not have during the Sabbaths you lived in it. And then he goes down to verse 42. I've jumped too far. Let's see. He goes down here to say that He's going to destroy His people, and the land of your enemies will devour you, and those of you who are left will waste away in the lands of their enemies because of what? Their sins. Also because of their fathers' sins, they will waste away. Now this is a profound point. The generation, get this, the generation that went into the Babylonian captivity right here are also inheriting the sins of their fathers. Let me make this clear. How many years had Israel been in apostasy? 390. Judah, how many? 40. Total? 430. Nobody lives that long in these days. So the 70 Sabbath years that had been violated were adding up on a generation that wasn't there when it started. Does that make you understand what I'm trying to say, Beverly? And so what I'm saying is that when we get down to the last generation here, the one that's going into captivity, they're going to suffer for whose sins? The sins of their fathers. Somewhere in the Ten Commandments, do you remember the statement the Lord says? Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. Here's the evidence of it. What I'm trying to tell you is that the full cup principle works like this. God starts a nation, and as it fills up its cup of sin, and the cup is longer than one generation. The cup is larger than the sins of one generation. But when that generation, a present generation, fills it up, all that God has promised comes into play. See, God is alive all the time. He is eternal. And I'm trying to show you that the sins of the fathers build up, build up, build up until the current when God deals with sin, He is not only dealing with the current generation, He's dealing with a large judicial process. He gives every nation. Israel is a model of how God deals with every nation. And I can explain in my own mind the rise and fall of all nations based on exactly what happened to Israel. Now, other nations did not have near the blessings, but they also did not have near the curses. In other words, there's an equilibrium. If God gives a person great responsibility, great accountability, great blessings go with it. If He gives less, then there is less. Some He gives 5 talents, some He gives 2 talents, some He gives 1 talent. That's true with nations. Everyone with me on that? Okay. So, when the here we go in Jeremiah, the days of Jeremiah, this is before the Babylonian captivity. God made a prophecy through the prophet Jeremiah, and He said, look, this whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon. How long? 70 years. Jeremiah 25:11. But when the 70 years are fulfilled, notice what God is going to do. I will punish what? And his nation. I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation, the land of the Babylonians, for their guilt. See that? God uses Nebuchadnezzar as the destroyer on Israel. And then, because Babylon fills up its cup, God then destroys Babylon. You get the picture. So, the decree, 2 Chronicles 36, 20, let's go to verse 19. I don't think that'll get us. This is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar's armies set fire to God's temple, broke down the wall of Jerusalem. They burned all the palaces and destroyed everything of value there. And he, that is Nebuchadnezzar, carried into exile to Babylon the remnant who escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and his sons until the kingdom of Persia came to power. And this verse is so prophetic. The land, that is the promised land, enjoyed its Sabbath rests. All the time of its desolation, it rested until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. And one last point here. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, this is when, Cyrus has conquered Babylon. In order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of a pagan king who did not know him to make a proclamation through his realm and to put it in writing. And this is the first decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. There were 4. But only one decree aligns with 7 sevens. Now, when I read that many years ago, and I was working on this Jubilee calendar idea, I said, a decree has to come forward. If we've got the synchrony just right, a decree has to be issued in the year of a Jubilee, that 50th year, which is the first year, of a new cycle. And so, in order to get 7 sevens lined up right, which decree would it be? And so, as I looked at my little chart back then, I found that only one will work. 457 BC. Let me show you these decrees. Let's see if I can find these for you. Okay. Do you see where my finger is pointing? Let me zoom in a little better. Do you see 536 BC right there? And do you see Cyrus's decree? That's the first decree that is issued, and that happens to be a Friday year. But look, it's in the middle of Sunday, Monday. It's in a Tuesday week. That won't work. You can't fulfill the specifications of Daniel 9 with this decree. And furthermore, if you count 483 years later to the appearing of Messiah, Jesus doesn't show up on time. He's not there. Does that make sense? Dave? You think so? Lil, did it make sense? In other words, when you say that 7 weeks and 62 weeks, you're talking about the beginning of a Jubilee cycle, which is a period of 749 years. So we've got to find a decree that is synchronous, that lines up with a 49-year cycle. That's why God said it that way. Know and understand that from the issuing of the decree until the appearing of Messiah will be 7 sevens plus 62 sevens. Does that make the screen a little brighter for me so you can see? Okay. All right, let's go to the next decree, which is issued by Darius, which is in 519 BC. Can you see that my finger pointing to it there? And that would be in a Monday year. 519 is a Monday year. How do I know this? Jesus died in a Wednesday year. So I've calculated all the Wednesday years back for 1,000 years, and I've calculated all the weekly cycle back for 1,000 years. And I can see that 519 is a Monday year. It's a Monday year, but it's in a Friday week. That won't work either. Then I went to 457. And lo and behold, 457 BC, in the 7th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, in Ezra 7 and 8, we find that Artaxerxes issues the decree almost, if not on the very day. I like to believe, because God is so perfect in His timing. Shasta, would you turn the light back on? Thank you. I like to believe that Artaxerxes wrote the decree on the first day of the first month of the new year of a Jubilee cycle. And the reason I say this is because here's what happened according to the record in Ezra. He had to write it within the first 3 days, because Ezra spends 9 days getting ready to depart to go to Jerusalem, and he leaves on the 12th day. So that only gives Artaxerxes 3 days to write this decree. And the decree is issued on New Year's Day in God's calendar. So that when Ezra leaves to go to Jerusalem, he has the decree in his pocket. And he arrives there about 5 months later. Took him 5 months to make the trip. And he then, after resting 3 days, gets the decree out and reads it to everybody in what is the month of August, our month of August. 5th month for them, but our month of August. The precision of this, God moved upon Cyrus's heart to issue a decree. God moved up on Darius's heart to issue a decree. But those decrees don't count in terms for the appearing of Messiah. God's timing is perfect. And once you understand the synchrony of God's ways, everything just lines right up. You understand what I'm trying to say?
It's the third decree. Why wasn't it the first decree? What was special about the third decree?
What is special about the third decree? The third decree is no different than the other two. Contrary to what some people say, there's no difference. The only difference in all 4 decrees is that only one is timely. And that's the one God wanted them to count from. He who has an ear, let him hear. The rest, just right over their heads. I don't know what's going on here. Now, let me show you something that's really clever. If we go to Luke chapter 3, this is the New Testament, and we're down now from the decree of Artaxerxes. We have traveled 483 years down the road, and we're here now in 27 AD, AD 27. Notice what Luke 3:15 is saying. The people were waiting expectantly, and were all wondering in their hearts if John might possibly be the Christ. Why were they so excited? Because John had come and explained to them the fulfillment of this prophecy, and when he said the kingdom of heaven is at hand, he meant it. It was a truth. The kingdom of God was at hand. And he had explained the decree of Artaxerxes, and the 483 years, and the 7 and the 62, and it all lined right up, and right on time the prophet John shows on the scene to herald the appearing of Messiah. Right on time.
To some extent, John was a miracle child.
Well, sure he was. He was a miracle just like Jesus is a miracle. Now, not the same Father, but the same kind of miracle. And John had explained to the people, and this is why the Bible says the people were waiting expectantly. And you might remember the story, how that the priests sent a group of Levites out to John in the wilderness and said, "Who are you? Are you the Christ?" "Nope." "Are you Elijah?" "Nope." "Are you that prophet that Moses talked about in Deuteronomy?" "Nope." "Well, who are you?" "The voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord." Well, the reason they asked these questions is because over in Malachi chapter 3, there was an interesting, chapter 4, let me take you there for a second. Notice this verse, Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. These are the last two verses in the Old Testament. These are the last two verses in the Jewish Bible at the time of Christ. The Bible closes in the time of Christ, before the time of Christ, with these two verses. I'd like for you to see what they say. "Look, I will send you the prophet Elijah before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, or else I will come and strike the land with a curse." One of the reasons the Jews rejected Jesus as Messiah is because Elijah never showed up. See, the prophecy, the last two verses of their Bible said he's coming. And so they go out to see John because John is obviously a man filled with the Spirit. And you couldn't help but after listening to him, that here was a man who was unusual. And he spoke with power and authority. Then they asked him, "Well, are you Elijah?" And when he said no, that was the end of it. He's not Messiah, he's not Elijah, we don't have to worry about it. Well, later on the disciples came to Jesus and they said, "Tell us, Lord, why do they say and why do they insist that Elijah must first come before they can accept you?" And the Lord says, "I tell you the truth. Elijah has come already, but they didn't know him." If you're willing to accept it, John is Elijah. Well, how does that work? Well, if you go back and look at what the angel told Zechariah, John's father, at the time of his birth, the angel said, "And he will be filled with the spirit and power of Elijah." Now, be honest with me, Norm. If you had been a very devout Jew and you had read Malachi 4 and 5, and this man they called Jesus, just a young man, 30, and you hadn't seen Elijah, would you be tempted to discredit? Most likely. And I would be right there beside you in the same shoes. Gail?
That's the same for today. There's so many people that say that Moses and Elijah were
The two witnesses, yeah, a lot of people believe the two witnesses are Moses and Elijah and they have to appear and so forth. Yeah. And by reading this prophecy, you can see how that on the superficial level, you could interpret it as, hey, Elijah's got to show up. And everybody knows that Elijah's still alive because he was translated from earth in a chariot of fire and taken to heaven. So they all know he's still alive. And in fact, Moses and Elijah did appear with Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration. But, go back to the screen there, I will send you the prophet Elijah. But what God is really saying in this prophecy, I will send you the prophet Elijah, a likeness of the prophet Elijah, in the spirit and power of Elijah. And if they had been willing to look at Jesus and study his ministry and his message, they would have discovered, hey, John the Baptist is the Elijah. What John the Baptist was to the first advent, the 144,000 will be to the second. Preparing the way of the Lord. And what happened to John the Baptist? Off with the head. And that will happen to God's servants as well. I want to take you to one more thing. No, I don't. I want to answer some questions now. And Dave, what's on your mind?
I just wanted to go back to that Deuteronomy 24.
Deuteronomy 24?
No, sorry.
Leviticus?
Yeah, where it talks about also because the fathers' sins they will waste away.
Yeah.
And I guess as I see that, it's more of a corporate statement.
Yes?
This deals with Israel corporately, because if you go to Deuteronomy, it says that you're not going to be, as individuals, held accountable for your fathers.
Oh, good point. Good. I'm glad you brought that up. Let me take you to a text that explains that a little better, perhaps. Let's go to Ezekiel 18, chapter 18, verse 5. Let's start here. Oh, verse 4. I want to show you that there's a difference between individual guilt and corporate guilt. That's important to know. Thank you, Dave, for pointing that out. Ezekiel 18:4 says, "For every living soul belongs to me, the Father as well as the Son. Both alike belong to me. The soul who sins is the one who will die. Suppose there is a righteous man who does what is just and right. He does not eat at the mountain shrines or look to the idols of the house of Israel. He does not defile his neighbor's wife or lie with a woman during her period. He does not oppress anyone, but returns what he took in pledge for a loan. He does not commit robbery, but gives his food to the hungry and provides clothing for the naked. He does not lend at usury, at interest, or take excessive interest. He withholds his hand from doing wrong and judges fairly between man and man. He follows my decrees and faithfully keeps my laws. That man is righteous. He will surely live, declares the sovereign Lord. Suppose he has a violent son who sheds blood or does any of these other things, though the father has done none of them. He eats at the mountain shrines. He defiles his neighbor's wife. He oppresses the poor and needy. He commits robbery. He does not return what he took in pledge. He looks to the idols. He does detestable things. He lends at usury and takes excessive interest. Will such a man live? He will not. Because he has done all these detestable things, he will surely be put to death, and his blood will be upon his own head. But suppose this son has a son who sees all the sins that his father commits. And though he sees them, he does not do such things. He does not eat at the mountain shrines or look at the idols of the house of Israel. He does not defile his neighbor's wife. He does not oppress anyone or require a pledge for a loan. He does not commit robbery, but gives his food to the hungry and provides clothing to the naked. He withholds his hand from sin and takes no usury or excessive interest. He keeps my laws and follows my decrees. He will not die for his father's sin. He will surely live. Okay, this takes a little explanation. The death of one eternally is not to be confused with the death of a nation corporately. In other words, if you're on the Titanic and you've done nothing wrong but it goes down, you're going to suffer the consequences of whatever happened to what you were on. Right? No fault of yours. If someone driving the boat makes a mistake and hits an iceberg and it sinks, you die, but the fault is under no guilt. In a corporate setting, when God destroys a nation, many people die, but have no guilt in that destruction. But many have guilt in that destruction because they have committed the very same sins that started filling the cup up from the beginning.
The same thing will happen at the end of time. Many of the righteous will die.
Many of the righteous will die innocently. That's right. But remember, with God, death is no big cookie. I love the way Joy says that. Death is no big deal. In fact, if an asteroid hits me on the head and I sleep through the Great Tribulation, that'll be fine with me. Joy?
Well, that brings up something we were talking about this morning. Does that mean then that if an asteroid hits, you can have two people living the same lives?
Yes.
Bad or good?
Yes.
If an asteroid hits an evil person on the head,
Yes.
and they die,
Yes.
and this evil person here is exactly the same but allowed to live,
Yes.
will the one that is living get a second chance?
Yes.
Or the one that is dead gets no second chance?
That's right.
So the one that is dead will perish.
That's
will
right.
not have eternal life.
That's right.
Well, God is such a fair God.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, I will never doubt God's
Yes,
fairness.
right, right.
I'm just questioning it. This doesn't sound fair to me.
Okay.
But one gets a chance,
Yeah.
and one does not.
All right, did you hear Joy's? Let me repeat it for those listening on tape. Joy's question is, we have two evil people living side by side. The asteroid lands on the house over here, kills this wicked person. This person, though, after he sees the devastation and hears the gospel, has a change of heart and has a chance to be saved. Well, how is it that one man gets to live and the other man doesn't? For eternity. And here's the answer. Paul looked at this very issue and concluded that today is your choice, is your chance for salvation. Today is the day of salvation. If you squander today, you may not have another day.
So that means the paradigm that they live in will affect them, unfortunately.
The Spirit strives with every person to bring us to God. There's the real issue. Because both evil people have the Holy Spirit struggling to get his toe in the door. And people become evil because they refuse the Spirit. People become firm and bold in their sinful ways when they reject the Spirit. We only can come to God if we open the door and let the Spirit lead us.
Do you think God knows, of course he knows, who would not change and who will?
Certainly.
So he knows. So those that perhaps go, he knows there was no chance for salvation.
People die in car wrecks every day. How is it their chance is over and you live? See, this is a problem. This is an issue that actually is ongoing this very day. You don't need the Great Tribulation to ferret it out. The fact is, it's going on right now. And a person, this is why Paul summed it up in saying, today is the day of salvation. Listen to the Spirit. Open your eyes and your ears and give God a chance. He seeks your salvation. Harden not your hearts, as in the days of Pharaoh, you know. And so the idea is that God, when the judgments began, it will be basically like today. How many million people on this planet will die today of cancer or some disease? And how many million have not even had a chance to hear the gospel? But God knows their hearts. He knows where they are. He knows how they've responded within their paradigms to what the Spirit has tried to do, and He judges generously.
I don't mean to monopolize this.
That's all right.
Another question that I had was that if, in fact, the good, you know what, I might just let it die. I'll get back to you in a second.
All right.
I'm old.
Well, I know you get to processing a lot of things. Brenton, you had a question then.
Go back to the stage. What was the date of the fourth decree?
444 BC. Let me show you that one. Right here. Let's see, where's my camera? There we go. Fourth decree, 444 BC, which is a sabbatical year, Sabbath year, not a Sunday year. But ironically, this sabbatical year is the sabbatical year of a Monday week. So it won't work either. 457 BC, right here. Now, don't get dizzy because I'm going to yank this thing from one side to the other. Is the first year, Sunday year, of a Sunday week. 457 is the only one that'll line up. Okay, let's take an intermission and we'll resume. We'll take questions the next half.